Every empire collapses. Only one keeps returning. Rome fell and never came back. The Mongols scattered into dust. The British Empire shrunk into a small island. But China? China has died and been reborn more times than we can count. So what's the secret? Why does Chinese civilization survive when every other great power crumbles into history books and museum exhibits? Today, we're diving into something that historians have been scratching their heads about for centuries. We're talking about 5,000 years of collapse and comeback. We're going to look at the psychology behind China's survival, the systems that keep it glued together, and what this means for all of us living in 2025. Let's start with a simple truth that sounds impossible. China has collapsed completely at least 8 major times in recorded history. Not just political changes or a new king taking over. Complete breakdowns, total chaos, foreign invasions, mass starvation, entire dynasties wiped out. The kind of collapse that would end any other civilization permanently. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD. That was it. Game over. No sequel. The Persians, the Babylonians, the Aztecs, the Incas, when they fell, they stayed down. Their languages died. Their cultures got absorbed. Their borders were redrawn by whoever conquered them next. Here's where China breaks the rules. When the Han Dynasty collapsed around 220 AD, China broke into 3 kingdoms. Total warfare for almost a century. Cities burned. Millions died. The population dropped by more than half. Any reasonable person would say Chinese civilization ended there, except it didn't. The Sui Dynasty reunified China in 581 AD. Same language, same cultural memory, same basic system of government. It was like hitting the reset button on a computer. The files were still there. This happened again with the Tang Dynasty collapse. Again with the Song. Again with the Yuan. The Ming. The Qing. Every single time, China shattered into pieces. And every single time, someone put it back together. Same shape, same identity, same story about who they were. No other place on Earth has pulled this off. Not once. China has done it 8 times and counting. So what's actually holding this together? Why doesn't China just stay broken like everyone else? Historians point to 3 things that act like a civilizational immune system. 3 pillars that survive even when the government, the economy, and the military all collapse. Most people don't realize how insane Chinese writing is. In Europe, if you spoke French, you couldn't read German. If you spoke Spanish, Italian was close but still different. Languages split empires apart. China solved this 2,000 years ago. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the guy who built the Great Wall and the Terracotta Army, he did something even more important. He standardized Chinese characters across the entire empire. Here's why that matters. A farmer in the north and a merchant in the south might speak completely different dialects. They literally couldn't talk to each other. But they could read the same text. They could write to each other. They could study the same books. When China collapsed, the written language didn't. A scholar in one broken kingdom could read the classics written 500 years earlier. He had the same cultural references as a scholar in an enemy kingdom on the other side of the country. This created a shared identity that survived political chaos. Think about it. When Rome fell, Latin slowly died and split into French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian. Each became its own thing. But Chinese characters stayed Chinese characters. Whether it's 200 BC or 2025, a Chinese person can still recognize and understand texts from thousands of years ago. The written language preserved the story of what China was supposed to be. It kept the instruction manual for how to rebuild. Every Chinese dynasty operated on the same basic deal with the people. It's called the Mandate of Heaven, and it's brilliant because it's both powerful and unstable at the same time. The idea is simple. The emperor rules because heaven chose him. But here's the catch. If the emperor screws up, if there are floods, famines, rebellions, invasions, that means heaven took away its blessing. And now anyone can overthrow him and claim the mandate for themselves. This created a cycle. A strong leader unifies China. He claims heaven's approval. His descendants rule for generations. Slowly, corruption creeps in. The government gets weak. Disasters happen. Rebellions start. Some new guy with an army wins. He claims the mandate. The cycle starts again. But notice what this cycle does. It doesn't create permanent fragmentation. It creates competition to reunify. Because the legitimacy, the claim to real power, only comes from ruling all of China. You're not a real emperor if you only control half the territory. You're just a warlord. This ideology created a magnetic pull toward reunification. Every regional strongman wasn't content with his piece. He wanted the whole thing, because only the whole thing came with the stamp of approval from heaven itself. Compare this to Europe after Rome. You had dozens of kingdoms, and each one said, "This is fine. I'm the king of France. You're the king of England. We're separate nations." No one in Europe spent 1,000 years trying to recreate the Roman Empire at its full size. But in China, every time it broke apart, multiple factions immediately started fighting to put it back together, because their entire ideology demanded it. For over 1,000 years, China ran on a meritocracy. Kind of. Most empires were ruled by whoever had the best army or the richest family. China invented the civil service examination system. If you wanted power, you had to pass a test. A really hard test about Confucian philosophy, history, poetry, administration. Rich kids had advantages because they could afford tutors. But poor kids could study and rise up too. There are stories of peasant boys who passed the exams and became high officials. This created a permanent class of educated people spread across the entire country. They all studied the same texts. They all believed in the same system. They all wanted China unified because that's when their careers mattered most. When dynasties collapsed, this class didn't disappear. They were still there in every province. And they remembered how things were supposed to work. They had the blueprints. When a new strongman showed up trying to reunify China, he needed these guys. He couldn't run an empire by himself, so he'd adopt the old system, bring back the exams, staff his government with scholars who knew the playbook. This is why Chinese governments, after every collapse, looked so similar. The scholar bureaucrats were the keepers of institutional memory. They were like a civilizational hard drive that survived every crash. Let's flip this around. Why didn't Rome come back? Why didn't Persia? Why didn't the Mongol Empire? Rome fragmented because it had no ideology of reunification. When it split into East and West, both halves said, "Fine, we're separate now." When Germanic tribes took over the West, they didn't try to recreate Rome. They created their own kingdoms. Different languages, different laws, different identities. The Catholic Church preserved some unity, but religious unity isn't the same as political unity. Europe became comfortable being divided. The idea of one European empire became a fantasy pretty quickly. Persia came closer. It revived a few times, but each time with different ethnic groups in charge, different languages taking over, different religious systems. Persia became Iran. The borders shifted. The identity evolved. It wasn't the same continuous story. China's different because the identity stayed locked in place. The language carried the memory forward. The ideology demanded putting the pieces back together. The bureaucratic class knew how to run the machine. Even when foreign conquerors took over, they got absorbed. Let's talk about the collapse that should have ended China forever. The one that actually makes historians wonder how it survived. The 19th and early 20th centuries were catastrophic. The Opium Wars humiliated China. Britain forced them to accept drug trafficking. Foreign powers carved up Chinese territory like a pizza. France took some. Russia took some. Japan took some. Even tiny Belgium got a piece. The Qing dynasty, already weak, completely lost control. The Taiping Rebellion from 1850 to 1864 killed somewhere between 20 and 30 million people. That's more deaths than World War I. Then came more rebellions. Then came the complete collapse of the imperial system in 1911. Then came warlord periods where China broke into dozens of competing military factions. Then the Japanese invasion in the 1930s. Then a civil war between the communists and nationalists. By 1949, China had spent roughly 100 years in various states of collapse, occupation, and civil war. The economy was destroyed. Infrastructure was rubble. Tens of millions were dead. The population was traumatized. Foreign powers assumed China would be weak and divided for generations. This was the moment when China should have become like Africa or the Middle East after colonialism. Fragmented states, endless conflict, borders drawn by outsiders, national identities that never quite solidified. But that's not what happened. The communists unified all of China under one central government. They created a new version of the Mandate of Heaven. The party's legitimacy came from liberating China from foreign humiliation and making it strong again. They emphasized Chinese civilization's greatness and its victimization by outsiders. The Communist Party structure mirrored the old imperial examination system. Instead of studying Confucian classics, you studied Marxist theory. Instead of becoming a scholar official, you became a party cadre. By 1949, China was unified again. After Mao died in 1976, China went through another collapse. Not a military one this time. An economic and ideological one. The Cultural Revolution had destroyed institutions, education, trust. The economy was stagnant. People were exhausted. Deng Xiaoping took over and hit the reset button again. He opened up the economy while keeping the political system closed. He told the Chinese people a new story. We're going to make China rich and powerful again. We're going to restore China's place in the world. And it worked. In 40 years, China went from one of the poorest countries on earth to the second largest economy. Over 800 million people lifted out of poverty. Infrastructure that makes America and Europe look outdated. Technology that competes with anyone. This wasn't random. This was the pattern playing out again. Collapse, then renewal. Chaos, then order. Humiliation, then restoration. So what's actually happening in the minds of Chinese people that makes this work? Why do they keep buying into the reunification story? It comes down to something psychologists call collective memory and narrative identity. Every culture has a story about itself. Americans have the story of freedom and opportunity. French people have the story of revolution and enlightenment. Russians have the story of suffering and endurance. China's story is different. It's a story of cyclical time, not linear progress. In Western thinking, history moves forward. Things get better or worse, but they don't repeat. In Chinese thinking, history is a wheel. Dynasties rise and fall. Chaos and order alternate. What goes down must come up. This creates resilience. When China collapses, Chinese people don't think, this is the end. They think, this is the part of the cycle before the comeback. They've seen it happen 8 times before. Why wouldn't it happen again? There's also something deeper about humiliation and pride. China spent the 1800s and early 1900s being humiliated by foreign powers. This created what Chinese leaders call the century of humiliation. It's taught in every school. It's referenced in every speech about national policy. This shared humiliation became a unifying force. It gave everyone a common enemy, weakness itself. It created a national obsession with never being vulnerable again. That obsession drives everything. The military buildup, the economic competition, the focus on technology and innovation. When you're told your entire life that your civilization is great, but was temporarily brought low by outsiders, and now it's your generation's job to restore that greatness, that's powerful motivation. That's the fuel for the comeback. Let's bring this back to 2025 and why any of this matters to people who aren't Chinese historians. China is in another rise phase right now. After the economic troubles of the past few years, after COVID lockdowns, after real estate crashes, the pattern suggests they're gearing up for another push forward. Because that's what the cycle demands. Western countries keep making the same mistake. China becomes more like China. Every reset reinforces the core system. Central control, cultural unity, national restoration. Most places don't have that. Most places don't have 5,000 years of practice at falling apart and coming back together. The American experiment is only 250 years old. No one knows if American democracy can survive its current stress test because it's never been tested like this before. China's been tested 8 times. It passed every time. China is pushing for what it calls national rejuvenation by 2049, the 100th anniversary of communist rule. That's the target date for becoming the world's leading power. If it works, if China successfully navigates the challenges of the 21st century and comes out stronger, then the pattern is real. It's not just historical coincidence. There's something genuinely special about the way Chinese civilization is structured that makes it nearly indestructible. If it doesn't work, if China fragments or stagnates or gets trapped in middle income status, then we'll know that modernity finally broke the cycle. That the age of cyclical civilizations is over. That nothing lasts forever after all. Either way, we're watching history in real time. So what do we take away from all of this? What's the actual lesson that applies to our lives? I think it's this. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about knowing how to get back up. It's about having systems and stories that survive individual disasters. It's about shared memory and shared purpose. China survives because it has institutional memory coded into its language, its ideology, and its bureaucracy. When everything else collapses, those 3 things remain, and they contain the instructions for rebuilding. Most of us don't have that. Most organizations, most communities, most families don't have systems designed to survive collapse and enable comeback. We assume continuity. We don't plan for the cycle. Maybe that's the real genius of Chinese civilization. Not that it never falls, but that it assumes it will fall, and it prepares for what comes after. Every empire collapses. Only one keeps returning. And now we know why. The question is whether knowing why changes anything. Whether understanding the pattern lets you break it, or just appreciate it before it breaks on its own. The answer to that question will define the 21st century. Like, share, and subscribe to keep watching Audio Point.